Welcome to the Crime Report with Ron Chinzer, where we cut through the headlines to bring you the real stories behind Canada's most pressing public safety issues. Today, we're going to be diving into cases that will make you question how our justice system works and whether it's doing enough to keep people safe, from controversial sentencing decisions to violent repeat offenders and preventable tragedies. These are the stories shaping our communities right now. Before we begin, a quick reminder, visit junonews.com/Ron to save 20% off of your subscription and stay informed with the full, unfiltered coverage you can't get anywhere else. Now let's go to July of 2025, where Judge Magali LePage, in a city just outside of Montreal, sentenced 52-year-old Frank Paris to 2 years in prison after he pleaded guilty to trafficking cannabis and hashish. The Crown had pushed for a 4-year term. The reduced sentence came after his lawyer presented a detailed background report showing Paris, though born and raised in Montreal, is an intergenerational descendant of Black Nova Scotians. That report outlined a lifetime of systemic racism, being wrongfully detained in an immigrant holding cell despite being Canadian, and facing discrimination in housing, employment, education, healthcare, and the justice system. Because he had already served significant time in custody before sentencing, Paris was released immediately. His lawyer later said it was surreal to shake his hand the next day, knowing that he was already a free man. Quebec's minister responsible for the fight against racism, Christopher Skate, publicly voiced concerns on August 7th, 2025, calling the decision a sad first for Quebec. He warned the risks of creating two classes of citizens, one racialized and one not, and argued that the efforts to address racism shouldn't create inequality under the law. Defense lawyer Sharon Sandiford countered that the judge was simply applying existing case law, similar to how the courts in Nova Scotia regularly consider reports outlining an offender's background and the impact of systemic racism. To understand the bigger picture, Canada already has a legal requirement to consider personal and historical factors in sentencing. Indigenous offenders, under what's known as the Gladue principles, stemming from a Supreme Court ruling in 1999 and 2012. Now, these factors include colonial trauma, poverty, and intergenerational effects of residential schools. There is no equivalent law for Black Canadians, though in practice, reports like Paris's have been used in some provinces. Some communities, including Black Nova Scotians, have relied on these reports to show how discrimination shaped their lives. But unlike Gladue reports, judges aren't required to consider them. The issue of systemic bias in Quebec has surfaced before. In September of 2024, a Quebec judge ruled that racial profiling was systemic in the Montreal police force and ordered a compensation for victims. That ruling and now this sentencing decision show that the recognition of systemic racism is slowly entering Quebec's legal framework, but inconsistently. Frank Paris's case marks the first time systemic racism was formally recognized as a sentencing factor for a Black individual in Quebec. It has ignited a national debate over whether the justice system should formally extend similar considerations to racialized Canadians beyond Indigenous populations, or whether that the risks creating a system that applies the law differently depending on who you are. Now, justice got an urgent wake-up call in Brampton. A judge's decision to let a man convicted 5 times of impaired driving walk free without serving a day in jail has been struck down as an affront to the administration of justice. A higher court stepped in and imposed the mandatory 4-month prison sentence. Now, this all began on the night of November 27th in 2020 when Joseph Leclerc drove the wrong way down Winston Churchill Boulevard in Mississauga. His Toyota RAV4 was missing its front passenger side tire, just the rim spinning, throwing sparks as he swerved through traffic. The vehicle was later found abandoned, and police found Leclerc nearby, stumbling, slurring his words, and admitting he had a fentanyl patch for pain. They also found a bag of pink powder, later confirmed to be fentanyl. And the toxicology results show 38 nanograms of fentanyl and 131 nanograms of another drug in his system. Now, this was Leclerc's 5th impaired driving conviction, and he was already under a 2-year driving prohibition from his most recent offense in April of 2019. He pleaded guilty to impaired operation and driving while disqualified. Now let's go to sentencing in March of 2025, where the trial judge openly acknowledged the law required jail time, but instead granted house arrest. When the Crown prosecutor warned that this was not permitted by a statute, the judge responded, "I know, but what if I do?" The Crown appealed, and on July 10th, Superior Court Justice Jennifer Wolcombe delivered a blistering decision. She ruled there was no legal basis for a conditional sentence. called the trial judge's actions a deliberate refusal to apply the law and ordered the 120-day jail term. Leclerc was given 48 hours from July 15th to surrender to authorities. Now, cases like this, they aren't isolated. Across Canada, repeat impaired drivers, especially those already banned from driving, typically face real jail time. In Newfoundland, a driver with 5 prior convictions got 6 months in custody. In Saskatchewan, another with the same record received a year. In one extreme case, a man with dozens of driving and impaired convictions was sentenced to 4 years behind bars. The pattern is very clear. Repeated impaired driving is met with prison, not leniency. This matters because mandatory sentences exist to protect the public. Conditional sentences, like house arrest, are reserved for low-risk offenders, not serial offenders who have shown that they will break the law again and again. The human angle in this is pretty stark. Leclerc had 5 chances to change each course, but each time he chose to put lives at risk. This time, the higher court reasserted the law's authority and sent a message. Justice, it's not optional, and public safety comes first. By July 15th of 2025, Joseph Leclerc will finally serve his time behind bars. Now, here's a story that's raising serious questions, not just about one violent incident, but about our system of release and public safety. On Saturday, August 9th, 2025, at approximately 9:40 a.m., Abbotsford police were dispatched to the Elwood Laundromat located at McClure near Town Line Road after reports of a stabbing. Now, when the officers arrived, they found the business owner with life-threatening injuries following what police describe as an altercation with an unknown person allegedly attempting theft. The victim was rushed to the trauma hospital in the Vancouver area and has since been upgraded to stable condition after surgery. Now, within minutes, officers tracked down the suspect, identified as 40-year-old Timothy Richard Louis Rowley, in the backyard of a neighboring home and arrested him by around 9:49 a.m. He now faces charges of assault with a weapon and aggravated assault and appeared before a justice of the peace on Sunday, August 10th. Now, he remains in custody as we know it, and his court appearance is pending and scheduled for August 14th. Now, what's especially alarming and what makes this case stand out is that Rowley was on a statutory release at the time. In Canada, a statutory release requires most federal offenders to be released after serving 2/3 of their sentence under supervision. Now, taking a look back at his history reveals a very unsettling pattern of a repeated violence and instability under supervision. In May of 2019, while intoxicated, Rowley strangled someone with a shoelace during a police interview. Then 9 hours later, he broke into the apartment of a 57-year-old paraplegic man, set fire to the property, and stabbed him 6 times, resulting in broken ribs and a punctured lung. The victim spent 5 days in hospital, and Rowley was sentenced to nearly 6 years for that crime. But his parole record shows multiple breaches. Day parole revoked within a month in 2022, then reinstated in March of 2023, with further breaches, including the failing of drug tests, stealing, hiding in a bathroom and stripping naked, and coordinating drugs into a prison using a cell phone. Now, his criminal record stretches way back to 2004, including assault causing bodily harm in Abbotsford, assaulting a police officer, a vehicle theft, weapons offenses, fraud, and even cruelty to animals, such as fatally beating a Canada goose in August 2018, for which he served 72 days. In short, this is someone with more than 20 convictions over 2 decades and a worrying inability to manage himself even under supervision. Now, there are some stories in Canada, cases where violent offenders on conditional releases commit new crimes. One noted parallel is in Vancouver's downtown east side, where earlier this year, a man on statutory release was arrested for armed robbery shortly after release. Now, these incidents echo the same systemic challenge, balancing reintegration with public safety, and legal experts argue that high-risk individuals may need a stricter bail and release safeguards, like requiring stronger supervision or denying release outright when the offender's history shows repeated failures under conditional terms. In this Abbotsford incident, bail isn't even on the table yet. As far as we know, Rowley is being held in custody ahead of his August 14th court date. But the story shines a strong light on the question, should statutory release always apply, even in the face of long, violent, and chaotic criminal records? We'll continue to follow this case closely, especially in the upcoming court proceedings. Share your thoughts. Should laws around statutory release change? Drop in a comment below and stay safe and stay informed. Now let's go back to something else. I'm about to share a deeply tragic story from Ontario that's been resonating across the province. On the evening of August 3rd, 2025, around 9 o'clock p.m. on Highway 48 near Aurora Road in Whitechurch, Stouffville, 35-year-old Andrew Cristillo, a devoted father of three, was driving home with his wife, Christina, and their daughters, Leah, Chloe, and Ella. Out of nowhere, their car was struck head-on. Andrew was killed instantly. His wife and their daughters were left severely injured. Christina, who has been bravely battling advanced breast cancer, managed to escape through the shattered windshield and pull her girls to safety as they cried out for their dad. In an instant, their lives were changed forever. The man accused in this crash is 18-year-old Jaiwin Victor Kirubanathan of Oshawa. He now faces multiple charges: dangerous driving causing death, 3 counts of dangerous driving causing bodily harm, failing to remain at the scene, and public mischief. But this was not his first serious incident behind the wheel. Back in January 8th of 2025, Kirubanathan was already charged with allegedly colliding with a vehicle carrying Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Police say he was traveling at more than 200 kilometers per hour, cutting across 3 lanes on Highway 401 before slamming into the Premier's SUV. Miraculously, no one was injured, but Premier Ford later called the accused an idiot, saying, "He hit me right on my door. We didn't even know what hit us." And noting that people across Ontario share his outrage, despite the severity of the January incident, Kirubanathan wasn't arrested or put behind bars. Instead, he was given a Form 9 appearance notice, which means he could remain free until his court date. No bail hearing, no driving suspension, beyond a short penalty for stunt driving. And he was back on the road just months later. Now, Andrew's family is left grieving. His brother Jordan called the crash the result of a complete and utter negligence and recklessness, saying justice means that this doesn't happen to other families. They don't need to experience the unbearable pain. Now, the community has rallied behind Christina and the girls. A GoFundMe campaign has raised more than $420,000 with messages describing Andrew as a beautiful soul full of life and pledging ongoing support. The most troubling question is how someone with such a recent history of reckless driving was allowed back behind the wheel. Lawyers point out that under current Canadian law, dangerous driving charges do not trigger automatic pretrial restrictions the way stunt driving does, which carries an immediate 30-day driving ban. Road safety advocates argue this loophole is dangerous and that too many tragedies like this could be prevented with stronger measures, and that this isn't the only case raising alarms. Across Canada, there have been other tragedies where high-risk drivers already facing serious charges were released only to cause new harm. Families from British Columbia to Ontario have echoed the same plea. If someone has already shown blatant disregard for a life on the roadway, keeping them off the streets until trial isn't just prudent, it's necessary. On August 13th, Kirubanathan appeared in an Oshawa courtroom for a bail hearing. Dressed in a white shirt, he sat behind glass, sometimes burying his head in his hands. Now, he mouthed thank you to his family members in the gallery. Across the aisle sat the Cristillo family, grieving, recovering, and waiting for justice. The hearing lasted 7 hours, and the judge's decision on bail and possible conditions is expected by Friday. Premier Ford hasn't softened his stance, again condemning the accused's recklessness in both incidents. Now, this is more than courtroom drama. It's a wake-up call. It shows how one decision, on the road or in the courtroom, can shatter lives. It highlights the urgent need to examine our laws, close dangerous loopholes, and put public safety first. Because for Christina, Leah, Chloe, and Ella, the damage is permanent. And for the rest of us, the question remains, how many more warnings will it take before we act? Now, imagine a world where police are fighting crime with tools built for yesterday, while criminals are operating like it's tomorrow. Now, that's the reality Canada's top police chiefs are warning us about. On August 12, 2025, Thomas Carrick, the Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police and President of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, told a gathering in Victoria that our laws are outdated and inadequate, no longer up to the job of policing, a world where borders don't matter to criminals. He pointed out that his association first proposed updating these laws back in 2001, yet here we are still waiting. Organized crime groups are exploiting global unrest, trafficking drugs, weapons, and people across borders using our legal blind spots and digital loopholes. To tackle this, the federal government introduced Bill C-2, also called the Strong Borders Act, on June 3rd, 2025. It's a sweeping law aimed at strengthening border security and giving law enforcement better tools to fight fentanyl, money laundering, and transnational organized crime. The bill expands Coast Guard powers to patrol Arctic waters and to gather intelligence, boosts information sharing between federal and provincial agencies, and gives Canada Post enhanced authority to inspect the mail for contraband, and allows authorities to pause, cancel, or charge or change immigration documents in the interest of the public. Now, it doesn't strip someone of their permanent or temporary residential status, but asylum seekers who wait more than a year or cross between official checkpoints will have reduced access to full refugee hearings. Creek says the bill gives police many, but not all, of the tools they need to deal with modern crime. He flagged a glaring loophole. No judge can currently issue a search warrant for a Canada Post package under 500 grams, even if it may contain enough fentanyl to kill. He also reiterated the need for bail reform, pointing to a 2-day police operation in downtown Victoria where many people were arrested, only to be rearrested the very next day after being released on bail. Now, while Canada's crime severity index dropped by about 4.1% in 2024, Creek warns that statistics don't tell the whole story. One victim is still too many, and public trust depends on more than numbers. This isn't the first time Canada has seen the gap between law and modern threats. During the 2022 Freedom Convoy, legal limits on freezing bank accounts or shutting down blockades forced the federal government to invoke the Emergencies Act, an extraordinary move that highlighted how quickly things can spiral when laws don't keep up. Now, Canada has faced similar challenges in the fight against fentanyl. Organized crime networks have adapted faster than our legislation, pushing law enforcement into a constant game of catch-up. The Strong Borders Act is a step, but as Carrick made clear, there are still blind spots criminals will exploit until they're closed. So why should you care? Because this is about balancing safety and liberty. Bill C2 gives police new powers, but leaves dangerous loopholes. Bail reform is on the way, allegedly, but not yet in place. And ordinary Canadians, people just trying to get their mail safely, might be shocked to learn that potentially lethal packages under 500 grams can't even be searched. Lawmakers, they need to listen, and Canadians want laws that keep us safe and still protect our rights. That's the Canada we should all expect and demand. Now, this next story is equal parts tragedy and mystery, the kind that shakes a close-knit community. On July 27th in Dundas, Ontario, a 25-year-old single father named Zachary Schumann was shot and killed. He leaves behind a 3-year-old daughter and a family now grappling with a devastating loss. The day unfolded like this. Around 5 p.m., Hamilton police were called to a parking lot where they found Schumann unresponsive. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Leading up to that moment, Schumann had met with 2 men in a metro parking lot on Governor's Road, a planned encounter allegedly. But something went wrong. A disturbance broke out. Schumann then followed the pair driving a blue Ford Edge to this more isolated lot, and that's where he was fatally shot. Witnesses saw the 2 men drive off, and police later recovered the vehicle in Kitchener, but the weapon has not yet been found. And on August 10th, 30-year-old Andrew Kowalik from Dundas was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. A day later, on August 11th, 27-year-old Musi Gebremariam from Kitchener faced the same charge. Now, both men appeared in court and remain in custody as we know it. Now, police say they're not looking for any other suspects, but investigators note that all 3 men, Schumann, Kowalik, and Gebremariam, knew each other from the Dundas area and had known one another for years. Importantly, Gebremariam is known in Hamilton as a drug trafficker. And according to Detective Sergeant Sarah Beck, while the exact reason for the meeting remains unclear, police believe that this case may involve drugs. Now, this tragedy leaves behind a grieving family and a little girl, now in her grandparents' care. The community has rallied, raising nearly $42,000 through a GoFundMe to help the family manage in the wake of their loss. Sadly, this isn't an isolated incident. Hamilton has seen 27 shootings so far this year, with 5 being fatal, a worrying trend for locals. For perspective, it's hard not to think back to another heartbreaking Hamilton case, the 2019 stabbing of 14-year-old Devin Brachy-Selvey outside Sir Winston Churchill Secondary School. While that was a schoolyard stabbing and this is a drug-linked shooting, both exposed how violence can ripple through tight communities, leaving families forever altered. As for bail, both Kowalik and Gebremariam remain in custody as we know it, and in Canada, second-degree murder charges typically mean no bail is granted because of the severity and risk. Kalik is scheduled for another court appearance on August 25th, and we'll be watching closely to see how this case unfolds. So, what's next? Police are gathering evidence, searching for weapons, and piecing together that fateful evening. In the meantime, a young child grows up without her father, and a community demands answers. We're going to continue to follow this case and, more importantly, look to see if any of these accused parties got bail, because while second-degree murder demands bail doesn't be allowed, we've seen this happen time and time again throughout the country. And for our final story, let's go to Friday, August 8th, 2025 at 2:42 a.m. in downtown Toronto. Imagine walking with friends along King Street West near Sudbury Street, just another late night evening. Then suddenly gunshots shatter the calm. This was no drive-by, it was a terrifying, unprovoked ambush. A man on a motorcycle zoomed by the group, nearly hitting them. Seconds later, he reappeared, shouting obscenities. As the group turned to leave, the rider vanished, only to wait at the end of the laneway. And then, fire. Shots rang out, unprovoked and brutal. Multiple rounds. A man and a woman, both in their 30s, were hit and left with injuries described as both life-threatening and life-altering. They were rushed to hospital fighting to survive. Fast forward to Tuesday, August 12th, 2025. Toronto Police's Integrated Gun and Gang Task Force swooped in. 32-year-old Neam Alexander from Toronto was under arrest. He now faces a mountain of charges: 4 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of aggravated assault, unauthorized possession of a loaded restricted firearm, occupying a motor vehicle with a firearm, and possession of a firearm while under a prohibition order. Yeah, that's right. He wasn't supposed to have a gun in the first place. Now, he was scheduled to appear in a court on the very same day, August 12th, at Toronto's regional bail courts in room 301 at 10 a.m. Given the severity of the charges, multiple attempted murder counts, the use of a weapon, and prior prohibition order, granting bail seems unlikely, yet details on whether it was granted or denied weren't made public yet. Now, the prohibition order alone suggests a very high risk, lightly swaying a judge to keep him behind bars while awaiting trial. Emergency crews were called shortly after 2:30 a.m., though the official police timestamp is 2:42 a.m., a small detail, but one that shows how quickly everything unfolds as authorities scramble to respond. And police have been seeking any dash camera security footage that might have captured the suspect circling back or firing those shots. Now, this incident echoes another shocking Toronto case earlier in 2025, the Piper's Arm pub mass shooting on March 7th in Scarborough. That night, 3 masked gunmen stormed into a packed pub at 10:39 p.m., firing wildly. 12 people were hurt, 9 by gunfire. Miraculously, no one died, but the injuries were described as life-altering. Both cases are examples of public, unprovoked gun violence in Toronto, one in a crowded pub, the other in a laneway at 2:42 a.m. Different settings, same raw terror, and both a reminder that public safety can be shattered in an instant. 2 people just walking with friends were nearly killed, possibly permanently altered by a motorcyclist's hatred, aggression, or impulse. Neam Alexander now faces some of the most serious charges under the law. As the case unfolds and we watch the bail process closely, one thing is clear: this was an attack on civility itself, reminding us just how fragile safety can be. If you saw something, heard something, or spotted a dash cam clip, call Toronto Police at 416-808-2510 or contact Crime Stoppers, whichever way you like, whether by phone or going online to their website. One small clue could make a huge difference. Now, that wraps up this edition of the Crime Report with Ron Chinzer. These stories aren't just headlines, they're warnings, lessons, and calls for change. Every case we've covered in today's show shows how decisions made in a courtroom and by lawmakers directly impact public safety on our streets. The more informed we are, the harder it is for these issues to be ignored. If you want to keep digging into these stories and others like them, visit junonews.com/Ron to save 20% off of your subscription. Stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay safe.